Hello and welcome to our very first recording in response to your look at the liturgy questions. I'm very excited about this and I hope it is the first of many installments. We have two very interesting questions this week. Now, the first question concerns the first reading about the temptation in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 2 and Genesis 3. And here's the reading. The Lord took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." Now, Genesis 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden. Don't touch it, or you'll die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, well, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. So that's the reading that you heard. And this is the question that was sent, and it's about Eve. The question wants to know, where is Eve? She's not anywhere in chapter 2. She certainly has a big part in chapter 3, but she's not even mentioned in chapter 2. So, why is that? Well, thank you for that question because it's a nice, easy question to answer. Eve is not mentioned in chapter 2 because she hasn't been created yet. The man who we know as Adam was alone in the garden with the Lord. It was just the two of them, two men with the animals. So it is the man who gets the command from God. God tells him, "Do not eat from that tree or else." And we just heard what the or else is. If you disobey, you will die. Now, by the time we get to chapter 3, so much has changed in the garden. We meet the serpent, crafty. In fact, he's the craftiest animal in the garden, and he's the only animal who can talk. And he talks like crazy to the woman. And it really is crazy talk. The serpent takes his life in his hands when the serpent defies God, when he lies to the woman about God. And here's an interesting little bit of information about this snake. He didn't always look like what he looks like now. He used to have legs, but he lost them. He lost them for being a peraza. It's a Greek word. It means liar, misrepresenter, a slanderer. And that's who he is. That's what he did to this new woman in the garden. The serpent lies to her. So, as a punishment, he loses all his legs, but he still gets around just fine. But how about that woman? She's a very interesting character who, we learn very abruptly, has now married the man that God put in the garden. Now he is her husband. And we have no idea when that happened. We certainly weren't invited to the nuptials. But back to the story, and it's a huge story with far reaching consequences. So the serpent goes to her to entice her to eat from the forbidden tree. Now, ever since this happened, since the very beginning of the world has blamed the woman for destroying the perfect world of the Garden of Eden. And of course, sure, everyone hates the serpent. And I think that many people still feel sorry for the man. He wasn't a very strong man, was he? But almost everyone hates the woman. Everyone detests her. She ruined everything. She fell for the snake's lies, and she tricked her husband into disobedience, which upset God so much that now everybody has to suffer just because she couldn't say no. So we can't live in paradise anymore, not in the garden, all because of this horrible woman we call Eve and her husband, Adam. And thanks to them, we are dealing with sin and death to this very day, which leads me to our second question for this week, which is all about sin and death. Now, on Sunday, we heard about it in our second reading. So let's listen to that again. And here it is. Just as sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin, and so death spread to all, because all have sinned. For sin was indeed in the world before the law, but sin is not reckoned when there is no law. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who did not sin in the likeness of Adam, who is a pattern of the one who was to come. But the free gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died through the one man's trespass, much more surely have the grace of God and the gift and the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, it abounded for the many. And the gift is not like the effect of the one man's sin. For the judgment following one trespass brought condemnation, but the gift following many trespasses brings justification. If, because of the one man's trespass, death reigned through that one, much more surely will those who receive the abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ. Therefore, just as one man's trespass led to condemnation for all, so one man's act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all. For just as the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners, so through the one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous. This is part of a letter, and in this letter, Paul is writing to a church in Rome. And Paul obviously is writing about sin and death. And this letter is considered by many church leaders to be full of the most important information for church people, and not only for Christian church people. And this is important. This letter is considered to be important for the entire world because sin is a worldwide problem. And sin enters the world through one man, and death comes with that sin. And they both come to all people, good people and bad people. Everybody inherits sin and death because of them. Now, does that seem fair to you? Well, it doesn't sound fair to me. Just because Adam was tricked by his wife, Eve, by that legless, no good lying, low down serpent, we all have to suffer. We all have to live with sin and die because of sin, because of them. That is so unfair. And it's also so difficult to understand. Who designed this plan? Well, believe it or not, it wasn't Paul. But for the next 3 weeks, we will be spending time in this letter with Paul at our liturgy. Now, Paul is also trying to understand how all this happened and what we're supposed to do about it now. And this is not an easy issue. Just think about it. If sin was in the world before Adam, and if sin was in the world before the law, then death reigned from the time of Adam to Moses. And you remember Moses, he's the one who gets the law from God. And Moses carries those tablets containing the laws down from Sinai to us. But death is still reigning, even though we have God's laws. And that's the way the world turns until we get the grace. Before the grace, many, many died by the trespass of one man. But how much more could God's grace and the gift that comes from God's grace come to us from one man? How much more could that gift just overflow to fix the world? And that's what God did. God found a way to fix the problem that started in the garden. And many believed, and many still believe, that through the disobedience of the one man, Adam, we were made sinners. So God fixes that, so that through the obedience of one man, Jesus, we will be made righteous. We won't be sinners anymore. Now, did you hear that? When I read you the letter to the Romans, written by Paul, did you hear Paul say that? No, you didn't. But many people do see this letter as Paul's explanation of sin transmission. Paul is trying to answer the question, how did sin and death enter our world? And Paul is not the only one writing. People have been writing about this since the very beginning, and we're still trying to figure this out. So, what do you think about it? Do you think Adam brings it in and Jesus takes it out? Well, some people do think exactly that. Paul didn't think that. Augustine did, but Paul didn't. Now, we're going to walk through this letter all during Lent. So, we're going to get an idea of what Paul means when he talks about sin. And he says it's not like a trespass, it's not about what Adam did, it's about what God did and still does. So, it's about the grace of God, not the sin of man. God's grace is more powerful than anything you can do wrong. Don't you love that? And grace is what we receive on a regular basis, so that every time we trespass, we are judged by the grace which is always flowing to us freely. It is God's grace that brings justification. And it is the grace of God that brings us the gift of righteousness. Now, does that sound confusing? I think it sounds crazy. And that is the crazy talk that we're going to be exploring this month. Righteousness that leads to justification. because of one man's obedience, because of Jesus. Now, as we work through this Lenten liturgy, write down your questions, especially your questions about justice, judgment, and justification. I know it sounds like we're going to law school, and we are in a way. And we need to study hard because we have to pass the bar and work in this world as God's representatives so that we can make this world and keep this world the way God intends it to be. And this is not an easy job, but we're up to it. So come to worship and hear the word, listen to the sermon, and write your questions about the sermon in your bulletin. And then send your questions to me. My email is in the bulletin. And then let's spend time together finding the answers. For now, I wish you Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov, it's a Hebrew expression. It means have a blessed week. Shalom.